Travis, we had a great time last week. That was so much fun talking about that stuff.
It was a whole week that we've last talked.
I know. I've been wearing this shirt the whole time.
You never bathe.
No,
You're a dirty, rotten scoundrel. By the way, I love that movie.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie? You remember that movie?
Yeah, that was great.
Have we talked about this ever?
No.
My wife and I watched the remake with Anne Hathaway over the summer.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, and I'm watching it. It's called The Hustle. And so I'm like, okay. So we're watching it. I was like, I've seen this movie before. And I mean, they are frame by frame taking you through the same story. And it's just women instead of men. And so I asked my wife if she had seen the original. She's like, no. I was like, well, so about a week or so later, we fired up the original, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is the same movie. And then, of course, Steve Martin and Michael Caine just they killed, and it was just it's such a better movie. Yeah. Just an objectively better movie than what we got in the remake. So
it almost always is.
I don't know why they did it. I don't know why. I guess I don't know. I don't know why they did it.
When do they ever do remakes that are better than the original? Virtually never.
I'm having a hard time thinking.
Yeah. So anyway.
Speaking of thought, this is Travis and Ross, and we're doing Christ on Purpose. And I've been interacting with a guy. I don't really consider him a friend because I don't know him that well, but he and I have interacted before. And he is thinking, he's an atheist acquaintance of mine, I should say. And he is thinking long and hard and deep on the ontological argument. So I was just curious, do you know what the ontological argument is?
Why don't you spell it out, Travis?
The ontological argument is an argument which tries to demonstrate that God is logically necessary. So the idea of logical necessity would be that God exists in every single logically possible world. So if you can conceive of a world, God must be in that world. There's a very simple way of saying it. Another way of saying it is to say that the proposition God exists is analytically true. So that it is as contradictory to say that God does not exist as it is to say that a triangle does not have three sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, can you demonstrate that God is analytically true, therefore logically necessary in that sense? And Anselm, a Christian monk who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in England, his dates are 1033 to 1109. And he wrote, he came upon through his meditations, a proof for God's existence that philosophers have been dancing around for thousands of years, or over 1,000 years now. Or are we at that point? Yeah, we're almost at over 1,000 years. So the argument goes like this. By definition, God is the greatest conceivable being. And we know that because if I could conceive of a greater than God, then that would be God.
Mm-hmm.
So far, so good.
Mm-hmm.
God exists, at least in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to exist in the mind and reality is greater than existing in the mind alone.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we pretend just for a second that the greatest conceivable being, God, exists only in the mind, that God does not exist in reality? Are you with me?
Yep.
Now here's where the spin comes. If that is true, if God exists only in the mind and not in reality, then I can conceive of a greater than God. Namely, I can conceive of one that exists in the mind and in reality.
Mm-hmm.
but God is the greatest conceivable being. And therefore, it's a contradiction to say, I can conceive of a greater than God.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I must conclude not that God is not the greatest conceivable being, but rather that the greatest conceivable being exists in the mind and in reality. Ergo, God exists. And so I've proven that God exists simply by reflecting on the concept of God.
It's an easy argument to disagree with, and it's almost impossible to put words to the disagreement.
You know, Richard Swinburne, who's arguably the greatest defender of theism of our generation, he's rivaled by William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga. I mean, he's one of the best. He said almost that very thing as he was reflecting on the ontological argument. He's like, almost nobody agrees with it, and yet hardly anybody can tell you where the problem is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now, I just, as you were laying it out, try this on. Could you say that a greater God exists not only in my mind but in reality, but he doesn't exist in everybody's mind? And wouldn't the greatest possible being exist in reality and all, not just all minds, but all possible minds? Could that be a refutation to that?
I think that there's several things that an Anselmian, if you will, could go. One thing he could do is say that deep down, we're all kind of aware of God, so he's not going to be that. He's not going to find a problem with that. Another thing you could just say is stipulate that, okay, is it possible that someone could go their whole life without ever thinking of God, even implicitly, so that there's absolutely no knowledge of God, right? Okay, fine. But our point is the minute the idea of God enters into your head, by hook or by crook, right? However it gets in there,
Yeah.
you're committing a contradiction if you say that being doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think
I'm
that's
not,
yeah.
I'm not worried about the pagan who, never thinks of God. But what about you, the person in front of me? Have you ever considered this idea that the God that you reject can only be rejected if you're a fool? I mean, that's exactly, he actually quotes Psalm 14:1 as sort of the jump start of the proof. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. He actually gives philosophical gravitas to that claim that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
So one of the things you're saying there, Travis, another way to say it would be, the first time you hear about the concept of God, and I would say also the first time you hear about Christ and the gospel, you then become responsible eternally for how you respond to it.
Yeah, and I think Anselm would say that he had hit upon something, and you can find this sort of touched on in philosophers that went before him. I see an implicit version of this in Cicero, as I read for the first time his book on the nature of the gods. You find it a little bit in Augustine. He has an argument from truth. Just the very idea of truth proves that there is an eternal mind that contemplates it.
Yeah.
So you find these kind of hints all through philosophical literature, all through Greek philosophy. And I think he would agree with me that there were precedents to this argument. So, yeah, it's a fun argument.
So your friend who you are dialoguing with, where is he hanging up on this?
Well, he and I have been exchanging some messages, and it's been interesting. He says, and it's an interesting, if you will, idea. He says, suppose that Anselm was right, that maximal greatness entails that God's existence necessarily surpasses all finite human conception. theists cannot also coherently claim the following. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to argue that the idea of God as a necessary being, this logically necessary being that we've been talking about, that idea cannot be compatible with a series of other ideas that theists generally accept, like God exists, God is within what can be conceived, that is, God exists in our understanding, and God is that than which no greater can be conceived. He says, and then he quotes Anselm, and this is what Anselm says. Anselm says, Lord, not only are you that than which a greater cannot be conceived, but you are also something greater than can be conceived. For since it is possible to think that there is such a one, then if you are not this same being, something greater than you could be conceived. Now, this is, if I may pause, this is a really interesting insight on Anselm's on Anselm's part, because what he's saying is that not only is God the greatest concept that we have, he's greater than any concept we have of him.
Yes. Yes.
And so he's saying God is incomprehensible. So my friend says this: Anselm is right, I think, not because inconceivability is itself a great making property of God's nature, but because necessarily excellence that surpasses our comprehension is surely greater than any excellence merely within it. And God is supposed to be that than which no greater can be conceived. So the idea that God is our greatest concept and is greater than any concept we have of him is really a logical entailment of just the idea that God is the greatest conceivable being. So then he goes on to say, to be sure, I'm not entirely convinced it is right, and I don't think it's cogent even if it is. I do think it forces us into a sort of religious mysticism like that of Damia and Hume's dialogues. I imagine some classical theists would see it as a welcome critique of theistic personalism. My mentor is a Thomist, and he said something along those lines to me on Sunday. Still thinking about it, though. In short, I think Anselm pushes us towards this idea of God. The question is not concerning the being, but the nature of God. This I affirm, from the infirmities of human understanding to be altogether incomprehensible and unknown to us. The essence of that supreme mind, his attributes, the banner of his existence, the very nature of his duration, these and every particular which regards so divine a being are mysterious to men. Finite, weak, and blind creatures, we ought to humble ourselves in his august presence, and conscious of our frailties, adore in silence his infinite perfections, which eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man to conceive them. They are covered in a deep cloud from human curiosity. It is profaneness to attempt penetrating through these sacred obscurities, and next to the impiety of denying his existence is the temerity of prying into his nature, in essence, decrees and attributes. And so he thinks that this whole idea of God leads to a kind of mysticism, and the kind of rational apologetic that you and I love is therefore eclipsed by this contemplation of God.
Well, I would ask him, could this God, which is beyond comprehension, create? Can he make something that's outside of himself? And if he can, then can in that which he creates, can he create other personal beings in his image? And to the extent that he can do that, he can create those beings in a way where they can comprehend and perceive and believe in at least some narrow characteristic of who God is. Just the idea that he is able to create, and as those beings created in his image, we really can't conceive of any other way that the the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? God makes more sense to the answer to that than anything else. That is alone is evidence. The fact that he can create and we can conceive of that and comprehend it, it brings that infinite God to us in a way that our finite minds can at least say there must be something more than me. There must be a source of me and this universe. And so to the extent that God reveals himself, that would be like the very first way, the most prime way. He can reveal himself in however he chooses. And then once we are created in his image in that way that we can at least conceive that he exists, then all of a sudden there's some characteristics too, things like love. Well, he did it out of love. Well, we can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We can understand that he's personal because we are persons. We can create. We understand the idea of creating out of nothing. I can build a building. It's not out of nothing, but the design seems to come from my mind and not from any pre-existing source. So I think there's a whole set of things because of the way we're designed, that we're designed to perceive him in a certain way that he has graciously granted us. So I don't see a problem. To me, it's just if he chooses to create in us an understanding of certain of his characteristics, I think that's a really reasonable a reasonable answer.
Yeah, he's just going to press the point that whatever it is, let's say we can see that there is a divine being of some type that created the universe. And it's interesting. He does say my mentor is a Thomist.
Yeah,
and so it is possible, unbeknownst to me, that my acquaintance has actually become a theist lately and is just seeing which version of theism he wants to get into.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to ask him, but I'm not going to ask him right now. But I just find all of that interesting. But I think that what he would say, and I'm assuming right now he's an atheist, he would say something like, fine, let's concede that there is some sort of divine being that created the universe. It can't be the God of Anselm, because we're discovering that the idea of God existing in our finite minds, grasped by my finite mind, and unable to be grasped by my finite mind, that's a contradiction. And so you're going to have to give up something. You can't have all of Anselm. You can only have one or two of what he says, but you can't have all three or four of the propositions that my friend is contemplating. Now, it's an interesting argument, and I'm going to press him some, and we're going back and forth. I'm going to press him some a little bit and ask, why is it impossible why can't you make a distinction between apprehension and comprehension?
Mm-hmm.
I can apprehend God with my reason, but I certainly can't comprehend him in the same way I can apprehend you, my friend Ross, but I can't comprehend you. Right. Not in the sense that you belong in a psych ward and we sit behind the window and watch you play with the balls. We just can't comprehend what this guy's up to. That's not the sense in which I can't comprehend you. Right. You're a rich human being. You have all kinds of thoughts that I will never know unless you reveal them to me. Well, how much more is that true of God? As per your analogy about, I can conceive of what love is, and it seems that I'm loved by him because fill in the blank. He created me. He sustains me, what have you. So apprehension and comprehension seems to be a perfectly legitimate distinction that is perfectly consistent with what Anselm taught and doesn't in any way obstruct what Anselm was talking about.
Right.
Thomists have traditionally rejected Anselm's argument. I'm one of those Thomists who's very attracted to it, but so that makes me weird. But the main reasons Thomists have done this is because the epistemology of Thomas is empiricism. And as we talked about in Simplicity a few weeks ago, I know you, for example, because I'm informed by you. And so my mind is one with your form. And I'm doing all of this abstracting from the things I see, which would include you, empirically. I'm seeing you. And in seeing you, I can grasp your form. And in doing that, I can grasp what you are. Your form is what you are. Your quiddity, as Thomas would say. But I can't see God. I can only infer God from his effects. And so in inferring God from his effects, I can infer certain attributes that are true of him, but I cannot really know his essence. How could I know? Because I've never seen a purely simple essence. And so that's a problem for Thomas vis-a-vis the ontological argument, because the ontological argument is saying precisely that I have a concept of God in here.
Right.
Which would imply that I can grasp the essence of God. So that's why Thomas rejects Anselm's argument.
Well, like you can know things about me. We can know things about God. We can know a finite number of things about this infinite being who has thoughts and desires and way, grander and more beyond what we could ever understand. I mean, our understanding is that we are going to be joined with him and come to know him in heaven in the end times, and 10 million years later we are still going to be infinitely intrigued in coming to know him even more.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
But that doesn't preclude certain things that he has revealed to us that make sense to us about who he is. And the Bible says we can know God. What does that mean? We don't need to hear him or perceive him, but there is some fundamental primal way that we can know absolutely that he exists, and he is interested in me and guiding what I'm doing. And it's more basic than our senses.
That is true. And it's interesting that Paul tells us that even the pagans deep down know that God exists.
Yes, I believe that.
And of course, Jesus says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the one true God, and Jesus whom he has sent. So we have an interesting thing there. I mean, salvation and knowledge are tied together. Now, Thomas would argue that those of us who are saved will be transferred into the next life, and our natures will be elevated to the point where we can actually see the divine essence.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the beatific vision. And my friend, you've met Lane through this show. My friend Lane Tipton says that this is a kind of backdoor mutualism. What Lane is concerned about is fusing the creature with the creator on some level. Does God in any way, shape, or form take on creaturely attributes? And Lane, of course, says, no, I agree. And he thinks that Thomas is compromising the creator-creature distinction, not in the front end. The front end, it looks pretty good. But in the back end, this idea that my nature is, what does it mean to elevate my nature? That I'm no longer human? I've become something more than human? What does that even mean? Yeah. Unless it means that I'm somehow absorbed into God's essence, in which case God and creature are being fused together and all of theism collapses. And so that's his concern. But I do think you can avoid Lane's concern, you avoid the conclusion that he's concerned about by simply saying that God does elevate us in such a way that we can know his essence without ever comprehending it, but knowing in the same way I might have a very clear idea in my head, knowing by seeing the divine essence in all of its glory. And even knowing in the midst of that we're only getting a fraction of it, because even a redeemed mind, a glorified mind in the heavenlies can't really look upon that too long. He said that the angels surrounding Isaiah are covering their eyes because they can't really look upon the glory of God.
We will always be finite in some sense.
Yeah.
God will always be infinite, but we will be able to perceive him in a way that we can't now.
Yes. Man, that is quite a vision. Pardon the pun.
No, it takes your breath away, doesn't it? I mean, what an amazing thing to look forward to. Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know what else to say. I mean, we just been dealing just over the past couple of minutes, just dwelling on the most amazing thing about our existence, and really what Christians have traditionally said it's all about: attaining the beatific vision.
Yeah.
Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," and that's been traditionally seen as an invitation to the beatific vision, the most beautiful of sights that the mind could ever see is God.
All beauty, anything we are attracted to, anything we think that draws us and gives us that sense of we want more of, and that sense of awe, is a shadow, a small little trifling thing compared to what we will be able to see when we see him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amen. Well, I guess that kind of wraps it up for us then.
That's what a high. Wow. Thank you, Jesus. That's really great.
Until next time, dear sir.
How would we top that? I don't know.
Can never top the beatific vision. Ever.
All right, Travis. Love you.